Your favorite superhero is, well, they're a mathematical fraud.
A complete statistical impossibility. Yeah.
Exactly. And I know that sounds incredibly harsh, especially if you, like me, love the escapism of a massive blockbuster movie.
Or a sprawling fantasy epic. We all love those.
Right. But today, we're going to look at the cold, hard reality of why the climactic battles we all watch on screen are, quite literally, statistically impossible.
It's the ultimate collision between the narratives we desperately want to believe in and the immutable laws of complex systems.
Yeah, because the writers creating these massive epics are, well, they're entirely ignoring the statistical reality of how threats actually scale in our modern world.
They are. And we are pulling from three incredibly dense analytical sources today for this deep dive.
We've got a fascinating stack here.
Yeah, we have The Calculus of Heroic Collapse, a really interesting text called The Geometry of Myth, Scaling the Impossible Hero, and a widely debated paper called The Statistical Impossibility of the Lone Savior.
Which is such a great title. And the mission here today, for you listening, is to decode a very specific feeling you've probably experienced.
Oh, we've all felt it.
Right. You were sitting in a movie theater, the third act kicks in, the CGI budget just explodes across the screen, the orchestral score is swelling, and yet...
You feel completely disconnected.
Yes, you feel disconnected. The stakes are supposedly higher than ever, but it all just feels hollow.
We call that feeling, or rather the sources call it structural dissonance.
Structural dissonance. Okay, break that down.
It is the massive, unbridgeable gap between the capabilities of a single hero and the sheer scale of the threat they are facing.
Because no amount of brilliant visual effects or, charismatic acting can cover up the underlying mathematical failure.
Exactly. Your brain, at a completely subconscious level, knows the equation is totally unbalanced.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to understand why my brain is rejecting these movies, even when I'm, actively trying to turn my brain off and just eat popcorn.
Right. You just want to enjoy the ride.
Exactly. So the sources start by introducing this concept of narrative inflation. This seems to be the engine driving that hollow feeling.
It is. I mean, think about how storytelling has evolved over time.
Okay.
If you go back to early human myths, the threat was always localized. Beowulf fought a monster terrorizing a specific mead hall.
Right. It was just one building.
Exactly. The hero was a single strong individual, and the threat was a single strong entity. It was a 1-to-1 ratio.
But as human society grew more complex, our anxieties grew more complex, right?
And the stories inflated to match those anxieties.
So the stakes just had to get bigger to keep our attention.
Yeah, and that inflation became exponential. It wasn't enough to save a building anymore. Then it had to be a city.
Then the entire eastern seaboard.
Then the planet. And the galaxy. And now, in modern franchises, we are regularly dealing with threats to the entire multiverse.
It's exhausting. The scale of the threat is scaling geometrically.
It is. The villains are operating on a massive logarithmic scale. They are expanding across dimensions, assimilating entire planetary systems.
Or releasing, airborne pathogens that circle the globe an hour.
Exactly. But look at the protagonist. The hero's capabilities remain stubbornly linear.
And that is the crux of the mythic collapse. You are watching a linear protagonist existing in a logarithmic world.
What's fascinating here is how the writers try to mask this.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, the map doesn't work.
I want to make sure I am really wrapping my head around this, because this seems like the fundamental breaking point the authors are pointing out.
It absolutely is.
We use words like linear and geometric a lot, but how does that actually manifest in a script, on the page?
The easiest way to visualize the difference is to think about the underlying math. It's addition versus multiplication.
Okay, addition versus multiplication.
Linear progression is additive. The hero goes on a journey. They find a slightly better weapon. That's +1. They meet a mentor and learn a new martial arts technique. +1. They suffer a defeat, reflect, find a hidden reserve of willpower. +1.
So it is a steady, incremental, additive climb.
Exactly. It's the classic training montage.
Oh, right. We see the protagonist sweating, running up a mountain, doing target practice. They're clearly leveling up, but it's a step-by-step process.
Yeah, but now look at the villain. Geometric progression is multiplicative. It is a compounding curve.
The threat doesn't just add one soldier a day.
No, the villain unleashes a swarm of nanobots that consume matter and replicate. 2 become 4, 4 become 8, 8 become 16.
Then 32, then 64.
Right. Within days, it spirals outward into the billions. It is a massive, accelerating expansion.
So, okay, let me see if I can translate this with an analogy. It's like if there is a massive forest fire,
Okay, a force.
a fire that has already consumed a mountain and is actively spreading across 3 states, and the hero's solution to this problem is to go to the gym and do push-ups.
That captures the absurdity perfectly, yes.
Because the push-ups make the hero stronger, right? That's the additive process. They are getting physically tougher.
But the fire is doubling in size every few hours.
Exactly. The math just does not add up. No matter how incredibly strong that hero becomes. I mean, even if they do 10,000 push-ups,
They are fundamentally ill-equipped to combat a threat, operating on a compounding curve.
the hero's growth basically becomes statistically irrelevant.
It does. When you plot both of those regressions on a graph, the geometric curve of the threat skyrockets straight up.
Well, the linear curve of the hero barely rises off the x-axis.
Exactly. Your physical strength, no matter how highly trained, is literally a rounding error against a multi-state forest fire.
Is statistically irrelevant. Man, that is a brutal way to look at a protagonist we're supposed to be rooting for.
It is brutal, but it's the reality of the math.
But it leads perfectly into what the sources call logic fatigue. Because if the hero is a rounding error, how do they actually win?
Right, they shouldn't be able to.
I guess that is why we sit in the theater feeling so exhausted during the third act. We are experiencing this logic fatigue.
To really understand logic fatigue, you have to look at the cognitive neuroscience behind how we consume stories.
Okay, the neuroscience.
The human brain is essentially a highly sophisticated predictive engine. We are constantly taking in information, identifying patterns, and predicting what will happen next.
It is an evolutionary survival mechanism.
Exactly. If I drop a glass, your brain predicts it will shatter.
We are wired to understand cause and effect.
And we apply that exact same predictive modeling to the stories we consume, even when we agree to the rules of a fantasy world.
Like, say we accept that magic exists or that people can fly.
Right, we accept the premise, but we still ruthlessly monitor the internal logic of that premise. We demand that those rules be applied consistently.
So when the writer establishes a threat that has scaled geometrically across a global system, like a massive equation,
Yes.
and then tries to solve that equation by just putting a really angry guy in a cape on the other side of the equal sign.
The brain balks. The predictive engine basically throws a massive error code.
Because the subconscious mind is screaming that a localized physical force cannot possibly cancel out a distributed geometric threat.
It's your forest fire analogy again.
Yeah.
The writer's basically asking us to believe that the hero can put out a statewide inferno by punching one burning tree really, really hard.
And we sit there through a 45-minute visual effects sequence watching the hero punch that tree.
Over and over again.
And the narrative insists, through the dramatic music and the intense close-ups, that this localized action is somehow solving the overarching systemic problem.
And that cognitive dissonance, the gap between what the screen is telling us and what our brain mathematically knows to be true, manifests as logic fatigue.
The tension completely evaporates because the resolution feels mathematically arbitrary.
It feels completely unearned. The writer is trying to cheat the math, and our brains are catching them in the act.
They inflate the stakes to astronomical levels just to get us into the theater.
But because they can't figure out how to scale the hero geometrically, they just have the hero hit things harder.
Which brings us to the actual mechanical failure of these narrative confrontations. When these two wildly unbalanced forces collide, we see the complete failure of physical dominance.
It's a fundamental breakdown of narrative logic.
I really want to dig into this because this challenges the very foundation of action movies. The sources argue that pitting a single human agent against a modern threat is a structural failure from the word go.
It is.
But why? I mean, we've watched single human agents take down empires in fiction for a century.
We have, but the nature of the empires has changed. Modern big bads, as the authors categorize them, are almost exclusively written as systemic, decentralized entities.
We are rarely dealing with a single tyrant in a castle anymore.
Exactly. We are dealing with a rogue artificial intelligence that has infiltrated the global financial sector.
Or a sprawling corporate syndicate that controls supply chains and media narratives.
Or a hive mind alien invasion.
Threats that are essentially everywhere at once.
They exist across a vast network. They have a geometric distribution of power. The paper, The Statistical Impossibility of the Lone Savior, highlights this as the complexity gap.
The complexity gap.
Right. You have a hyper-complex threat functioning as a web of interconnected nodes, and you have a protagonist who acts as a single, isolated point of force.
And mathematically, a single point cannot dismantle a distributed web through sheer physical trauma.
It is great.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If a villain operates as a complex global system with a million points of operation,
Yeah.
how does punching the CEO in the face actually stop the company? It's like trying to fix a collapsed global economy by walking into a local bank branch and punching the teller.
Or punching the vault door.
Right. You punch the vault door, you blunt the metal, you cause a localized disturbance.
But the global economy doesn't flinch.
Not at all. The algorithms running high-frequency trading in a server farm halfway across the world do not care that you just punched a vault.
They don't even register it.
Yeah.
It is a profound misunderstanding of causality by the writers.
Because if a threat is systemic, the solution must be systemic.
Exactly. Yet, writers continually rely on what the sources identify as the power level trope.
Oh, the power level trope. I love this part. This is when the hero gets beaten down, remembers a tragic backstory, their eyes start glowing with newfound energy.
And suddenly they can hit 10 times harder.
Right.
The power level trope is the ultimate manifestation of linear thinking, trying desperately to solve a logarithmic problem.
It relies on the assumption that if an individual simply possesses enough concentrated physical force, they can overcome any obstacle.
Regardless of the obstacle's actual nature. But the authors argue that as the complexity of a threat increases, the utility of raw physical force actually approaches zero.
Because what good is a sledgehammer against a cloud of toxic gas?
Exactly. The source text uses a very striking image for this. They call it one sword against a million points of failure.
Okay, let's visualize that.
Imagine you have a protagonist with a mythical sword. It is forged from the heart of a dying star. It can cut through any known material in the universe.
It is the absolute pinnacle of physical dominance, the ultimate linear weapon.
Right. Now, deploy that protagonist against a biological weapon that has just been released into the jet stream.
And it's dispersing across multiple continents simultaneously.
The sword is completely useless.
Utterly useless. It does not matter if the hero swings that sword once or a million times.
It doesn't matter if they unlock a secret stance or if the sword glows blue.
None of it matters. The tool they are utilizing, localized physical force, is mathematically unqualified to interact with a distributed airborne contagion.
It's the wrong tool for the system.
But wait, Hollywood knows this, right? The writers aren't stupid. They know you can't stab a virus.
They do.
So how do they keep getting away with this in the scripts? They always find a way for the hero to punch something that magically fixes the whole mess.
They utilize a narrative workaround. They artificially engineer a false bottleneck.
A false bottleneck. Okay, break that down for me.
Instead of allowing the systemic threat to behave like a true decentralized system, the writer arbitrarily designs a single, highly vulnerable, purely physical point of failure.
Like a shiny red button.
Or a central mainframe, a master control ship, or an alien queen. They take a complex geometric threat and funnel it down into a single physical object.
So that the hero's linear intervention like swinging the sword or firing the missile can conveniently collapse the entire network.
The exhaust port on the Death Star.
Ah, there it is, the exhaust port. That is the seminal example in modern pop culture.
An empire spanning a galaxy is brought down by a single, localized explosion.
And it worked brilliantly in 1977. I mean, when I watch that movie, I'm not thinking about the geometric distribution of imperial bureaucracy.
Of course not. You're just cheering for the explosion.
Exactly. But why did it work so well back then?
It worked in the 1970s because the general public's understanding of complex network systems was fairly rudimentary.
That makes sense.
But the sources argue that as our real-world environment has changed, as we have transitioned into a hyper-connected, digital, globalized society.
Where we interact with algorithms and decentralized networks literally every day.
Exactly. That narrative shortcut feels increasingly cheap.
We intuitively know better now. We know you can't defeat the internet by taking a baseball bat to a Wi-Fi router.
Right. And you can't stop a global climate crisis by wrestling a smokestack to the ground.
The audience has evolved, but the narrative model hasn't.
And so when we see a modern protagonist attempting to punch their way out of a sprawling systemic crisis, it doesn't evoke a sense of heroism anymore.
It evokes a sense of naivety. It exposes the fact that the protagonist is, mathematically speaking, entirely unqualified to even comprehend the real problem, let alone solve it.
It's a structural failure.
Okay, this is where my brain really starts spinning. If this narrative model is this fundamentally broken, if the math clearly exposes the lone hero as a structural failure.
And our brains recognize the cheat of the false bottleneck.
Right. Why on earth is this still the dominant story we tell ourselves? Why do we keep buying tickets to see the math fail?
It's a great question.
There has to be a massive psychological payoff that overrides the logic fatigue, right?
There is. And this is where the analysis shifts from the mathematics of the text to a deeply profound psychological critique of the audience.
Okay, lay it on me.
We have to examine something the authors call the lone savior fallacy.
Because if the lone savior is a fallacy, why are we so addicted to it?
To understand the addiction, we have to look at the real-world data modeling regarding success and problem solving.
What does the data say?
The sources point out that in current data modeling across every measurable metric, collective action outpaces individual genius by a staggering margin.
Wait, really? Every metric?
Every single one.
But what about the massive paradigm shifts? What about Einstein? What about Steve Jobs? We always hear about the lone genius who changes the world.
And that is part of the mythology we tell ourselves to maintain the narrative. But when you look at the historical data, Einstein relied on a vast network of mathematicians.
And peer reviews.
Exactly. Decades of prior theoretical frameworks established by a collective scientific community. The tech innovators of the 20th century were standing on the shoulders of massive government-funded research collectives.
So the lone genius is a bit of a myth.
A massive myth. Whether you are looking at scientific breakthroughs, economic stabilization, or disaster recovery, a massive network of collaborating individuals will consistently outperform a single, isolated genius.
Even if those individuals only possess average capabilities.
Yes. The hive mind beats the lone wolf every single time.
Every time. That's wild. So collective action, networked intelligence is the actual engine of human progress.
It is the only engine.
But when you look at our myths, when you look at the blockbuster movies, it is the exact opposite. We see a severe disconnect between the actual statistical probability of success and what the internet affectionately calls main character energy.
Main character energy is a fascinating cultural concept because it perfectly encapsulates this statistical delusion.
How so?
It is the pervasive, unspoken belief that the rules of probability, the immutable laws of cause and effect, somehow do not apply to this one specific individual, simply because the narrative camera is focused on them.
It's like walking into a casino, looking at a roulette wheel and saying, I know the house always wins, and I know the math is heavily against me, but I am the protagonist of my own life, so the ball is going to land on my number.
That's exactly what it is. Statistically speaking, a lone protagonist charging headfirst into a fortified enemy stronghold holding 1,000 armed guards shouldn't survive the first 3 seconds.
Right. If you drop one highly trained operative into a room with 50 people firing automatic weapons, the math dictates a catastrophic failure for the individual immediately.
But the narrative bends the probability curve to ensure their survival.
The bullets mysteriously miss. The guards, for some reason, attack one at a time.
And the massive explosion only throws the hero dramatically through the air without causing massive internal hemorrhaging.
Which is physically impossible.
So the question these sources pose is a deeply uncomfortable one. Why do we, the audience, demand that the narrative bends this way?
Why do we insist on being fed a statistical lie?
And the answer they arrive at is, honestly, a little terrifying. They argue that our reliance on the chosen one trope isn't just innocent escapism.
It's doing something more insidious.
It actively masks a much darker societal fear. We are terrified of our own statistical insignificance.
Wow, that is the psychological root of the lone savior fallacy.
Think about the reality of the modern human condition. We live on a planet with over 8 billion other people.
We are inextricably linked to massive, incomprehensible global systems.
We are at the mercy of opaque economic markets, fragile international supply chains, complex ecological webs, and invisible data networks.
We are just tiny data points in a machine we can't even see the edges of.
Exactly. And in the face of all that geometric complexity, the individual feels incredibly, overwhelmingly small.
It makes sense. To recognize your own statistical insignificance within a global system is a deeply uncomfortable psychological state.
It generates immense existential anxiety.
We feel like rounding errors.
So we turn to these epic stories as a psychological salve. We invent the chosen one.
We invent a reality where the rounding error suddenly matters more than the entire equation.
We invent the one person who isn't a mere data point. the one person who possesses the localized physical force to stand against the tide of exponential growth.
We desperately want to believe that individual agency still trumps systemic momentum.
Because the alternative is admitting how little control we actually have.
I have to just sit with that for a second. That is heavy.
Yeah.
Main character energy isn't just an ego trip, it's a defense mechanism.
A very powerful one.
It is a shield against the overwhelming math of scale. We would so much rather believe in a magical statistical anomaly than accept the reality that our individual choices are often swallowed whole by the momentum of the collective system.
It highlights a profound philosophical tension in our culture right now.
Okay, let's explore that tension.
On one hand, you have the hard, empirical reality of our world.
Yeah.
Collective action and network collaboration are the only statistically viable methods for solving complex systemic problems.
But on the other hand, you have the mythic ideal that we continually reinforce through our media.
Right, the glorification of individual genius and unilateral force.
But I want to play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Go for it.
If collective action is the truth of how the world actually works and how problems are actually solved, why don't writers just make blockbusters about that? Why don't we have massive summer tentpole movies about supply chain management or decentralized scientific peer review?
Well, because collective action is inherently difficult to dramatize within the constraints of traditional storytelling.
It's not cinematic.
It's decentralized, it is messy, it involves bureaucracy, constant compromise, slow iteration, and the sharing of credit.
It does not have a single charismatic face you can put on a movie poster.
Exactly. You can't exactly do a slow-motion training montage of 1,000 scientists sitting in different cubicles across the globe separately running data simulations for a vaccine study.
I mean, you could film that, but nobody's going to cheer in the theater when the spreadsheet finally balances.
Right. Narrative, by its very nature, requires focus. It requires an emotional anchor.
It is infinitely easier for a writer and, more immediately satisfying for an audience to anchor their emotional investment to one person's face than to a sprawling, faceless collective.
But taking the easy way out narratively is exactly what has led us to this crisis of logic fatigue.
By continually feeding us the comfort food of the lone savior, the writers are fundamentally misrepresenting the reality of the threats we face.
We are soothing our fear of insignificance with a fantasy that teaches us the wrong way to solve problems.
Which brings us to the most vital part of these analytical texts. These sources do not simply tear down our current mythic structures and leave us with nothing.
No, they offer a very specific blueprint for how to rebuild them.
Right. We need to transition from the mathematical failure of our current stories to a proposed solution. If the lone savior is a statistical impossibility, and raw physical dominance is a complete failure against complex systems,
what does a mathematically viable modern hero actually look like?
are we just doomed to watch boring movies forever?
Not at all. The central proposition in the geometry of myth is a necessary shift toward a narrative model they call networked heroism.
Networked heroism. That sounds incredibly modern. What does that actually look like in practice for a protagonist?
It requires a fundamental shift in how we conceptualize individual power.
Okay, how so?
The old narrative model treated the hero as a monolith, a standalone, impenetrable pillar of physical strength that simply crashes into the enemy until the enemy stops moving.
The sledgehammer approach.
Right. Network heroism dictates that the protagonist must act as a node within a larger system.
A node, so like an intersection point, a conduit in a larger web.
Precisely. It requires the protagonist to abandon the ego of the lone savior. In this model, the hero is no longer the entire equation. They are merely a variable within it.
So their power does not derive from being the physically strongest or the fastest in a linear sense?
No. Their power derives from their connectivity and their comprehension.
Their ability to understand the network.
Yes. To map the architecture of the complex system they are fighting and find the exact specific pressure point where a targeted intervention will cascade.
So instead of the hero being a giant sledgehammer trying to smash an entire skyscraper to the ground by hitting the concrete over and over,
The new hero is more like a structural engineer.
or a hacker, or a surgeon. Let's follow those analogies because they perfectly illustrate the concept of leverage.
Leverage is the key word here.
A surgeon doesn't cure a complex biological disease by bludgeoning the patient's body with raw force.
That would be counterproductive.
They map the biological system, they identify the anomaly, the tumor, or the blockage, and they apply a highly precise, localized intervention.
They make a tiny cut.
And that tiny intervention allows the entire massive biological network to correct itself and heal.
And the hacker analogy works the same way.
Right. A hacker doesn't physically destroy a massive server farm to take down a network. They find the one open port, the one structural vulnerability.
They insert a tiny string of logic, and they let the system's own massive architecture do the heavy lifting to collapse itself.
The hero doesn't have to be bigger than the system, they just have to be smarter than it.
This is exactly what the authors mean when they talk about redefining the narrative win condition.
Okay, let's expand on that. How does the win condition change the actual experience of watching the movie?
In traditional linear myths, the win condition is total physical dominance. The climax is a contest of endurance.
You punch the villain until they are broken, and you stand triumphant over their body.
The tension is derived from a very simple question. Will the hero hit hard enough or survive long enough?
Which, as we established earlier, leads straight to logic fatigue when the villain is a decentralized network.
But in network terrorism, the win condition shifts entirely away from physical dominance. It becomes about strategic, systemic intervention.
So the victory isn't about overpowering the threat with muscle.
It is about out-leveraging the threat with comprehension. It is about using the geometric, compounding nature of the threat against itself.
The climax of the story changes from a test of brute endurance to a test of structural comprehension.
Yes. The tension shifts completely. It's no longer, will the hero hit hard enough? It becomes, can the hero solve the puzzle in time?
Can they navigate the overwhelming complexity, bypass the systemic defenses, and deliver the precise, localized intervention required before the exponential growth of the threat consumes everything?
It turns a 30-minute CGI fistfight into a high-stakes surgical strike.
And the beauty of this, the reason this is so exciting as an audience member, is that it completely cures the logic fatigue.
Because it finally respects the mathematics of scale.
When a protagonist uses strategic systemic intervention, our brains do not throw an error code.
Our predictive engines understand the concept of leverage. We understand that a very small, precise action like removing a single linchpin or introducing a counter algorithm can logically collapse a massive structure.
The equation finally balances. The scale of the threat can still be incredibly massive. It can still be a global or multiverse level crisis.
But the writer doesn't have to artificially inflate the hero's physical strength to match it.
The hero just has to find the linchpin. That is immensely satisfying to watch. It actually embraces the math instead of trying to cheat it.
And that is why the sources conclude that the most compelling, resonant future myths will be those that fully adopt this networked model.
The audience is just getting smarter. Our daily interaction with the world is becoming more complex.
We are rapidly outgrowing the monolithic sledgehammer hero. We crave stories that reflect the interconnected, systemic reality we actually inhabit.
We want stories where the hero utilizes the network, where they rely on collective knowledge, perhaps guided by a team of specialists, and apply surgical precision.
We still get the thrill of the victory, the massive explosion, the saving of the world, but it is an earned victory.
It is mathematically and statistically viable.
It successfully bridges the gap between the empirical truth of collective action and the deep narrative desire for individual agency.
The node, the networked hero, becomes the essential catalyst for the collective system to succeed.
Exactly.
This has been an incredibly dense, eye-opening journey. Let's do a quick synthesis to pull all these threads together for everyone listening.
Good idea.
We started by looking at the absolute mathematical impossibility of the lone savior trope. We unpacked how pitting linear, additive protagonists against geometrically scaling threats creates severe narrative inflation.
And how that mathematical failure triggers logic fatigue in our brains.
We then explored the futility of the power level trope, proving that a localized physical force is entirely meaningless against distributed, hyper-connected threats.
We established that you simply cannot punch a systemic problem.
From there, we dug into the dark psychological underbelly of these stories. We exposed main character energy as a cultural defense mechanism.
A way to comfort ourselves and mask our deep-seated fear of our own statistical insignificance in a massive, complex world.
We'd rather believe in magic than accept we are rounding errors.
And finally, we mapped out the structural solution, the necessary shift toward network heroism.
The transition from the hero as a monolith to the hero as a node, and the evolution of the win condition from total physical dominance to strategic systemic intervention.
It is a total recalibration of how we tell and consume epic stories.
I am never going to be able to watch a third act battle scene the same way again. Seriously.
This analysis raises one final, highly provocative question.
Yeah.
It's an implication that extends far beyond movie theaters and pop culture.
Okay, what is the lingering question?
If our modern myths are constantly training us, both consciously and subconsciously, to patiently wait for a mathematically impossible lone savior to descend and solve planetary-scale problems with physical force,
Yeah.
are our stories actually making us less equipped to handle the real-world geometric threats we currently face? Are we waiting for a Superman when we should be actively building a network?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy, lingering thought. Are our own myths making us complacent in the face of actual systemic crises? That is going to sit with me for a long time.
It's definitely something to think about.
So I want to pass that directly to you, listening right now. Think about the win conditions in the favorite stories you consume.
Examine the mechanics of the victory.
The next time you sit down to watch a massive third act, look past the special effects and look at the math. Are you watching a monolithic sledgehammer trying to break a system, or are you watching a network surgeon trying to leverage it?
And more importantly, which one of those models do you think our real world desperately needs right now?
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. It always feels like trying to read a murky diagnostic chart when you analyze pop culture on this level.
But when you apply the cold, hard logic of mathematics to the myths we love, the jagged white lines become undeniably clear.
We will see you next time.